Debate of the year titled Man Up or Man Down. Is there a crisis of masculinity in the 21st century? And for those of you who don't know me, I'm Dr. Adele. I'm a professor in the English department, and I also have the honor and the privilege of being tonight's moderator. Before we begin, I'd like to thank a few of our funding bodies. This event is brought to you by Crossing Borders Research Cluster, the Gender Axis, and it is run by our fearless leader, Dr. Cristian Berco, who's also provided the free food tonight. So thank you, Dr. Berco. We've also had a lot of support from the SRC, and Justin McCarthy, who's the SRC academic, has been absolutely instrumental in setting this up. So is Justin here? Yeah. Show yourself, Justin. Thank you very much. Okay, so the last week or so has been the Bishop's version of March Madness. You don't need college basketball to have our own March Madness. We've had an incredible and exciting lineup of events. We've had a busy schedule, so thank you very much for coming out tonight. Some people might say that we are in super saturation mode, right? That we are absolutely exhausted, the weather is beautiful, we don't want to be inside, and yet we have all of these wonderful things to do. And I'm going to suggest that this is not actually super saturation. Instead, there's a kind of natural rhythm of the academic year where these events start to crystallize and can only really happen in the last couple of weeks of the school year. You guys have been through an entire year, you've built ideas, you've made connections across disciplines, you've taken courses in a number of different areas, and now things are overlapping in really exciting ways. I've seen a few themes emerge in the last 7 days that are really exciting, and one of those themes is gender and identity. And I want to give you an example of the ways in which these things are overlapping and really culminating in tonight's event and tomorrow's public scholarship event. For example, we had a social activism walk called Slut Walk last Thursday, which brought everybody to the gate and questioned the notion of the word slut. Can women reclaim this word and appropriate it for their own uses? That overlapped with the vagina monologues, which was here last night. That is a question that is being asked tonight in our gender debate about masculinity, and it's a question that will also be asked tomorrow from 1 until 3 here at the gate. We have invited the MTV show One Girl, Five Gays to talk about queer subjectivities and virtual communities. So there are a number of different events, right? We've got an activist walk, we've got a play, we've got a debate, and a public scholarship event. Many different kinds of approaches to some of the same questions. In my opinion, that asking these questions from different perspectives is a more effective, dare I say, more exciting learning opportunity than any content in one given course. So I really encourage you to look at some of the questions tonight, the arguments that these teams are going to present. I encourage you to make connections not only from the things that you've studied in your classes, but also the events that you've been attending throughout the semester and the year, and hopefully we can facilitate a few light bulbs. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce your two teams for this evening. So we have Team Pro-Crisis. Dr. Cristian Berco, who is a professor of history at Bishop's. He has students write with quills as a professor of history, memorize passages from St. Thomas Aquinas, and learn to speak only when spoken to. He lives by Proverbs 13:24, quote, "He that spares his rod hates his son, but he that loves him chastens him betimes," end quote. Registration for his classes opens next week. His very brave companion and teammate is Taylor Johnson, President Taylor Johnson. She's a fourth-year business student in the Williams School of Business. She's completing a major in marketing and a minor in computer science. So she spent a lot of her time at Bishop's working for the SRC, playing rugby for the varsity women's team, and she's really tough. She can teach a thing or two about masculinity. And she is a member of the newly minted debate team. So please welcome Pro-Crisis, Taylor. The team that is arguing against a crisis of masculinity is headed by Professor Jenn Cianca. She teaches in the Classics Department and the Liberal Arts program. She will soon be a doctor, but not the kind that help people. Now, having grown up with 4 macho Italian-American brothers, she sees no evidence of a crisis of masculinity, but hopes one will arrive soon, preferably before the family reunion. Because frankly, she thinks a crisis sounds refreshing. We also have our student teammate, Bill Crooks. Bill Crooks is a second-year psychology student. His hobbies include lifting heavy things, logic parties, and other activities so sacred and manly they may only be written in the sweat and blood of and on the fresh skins of large, dangerous animals he has just killed with his bare hands. All right, so we have some very entertaining debaters this evening. I'm going to read the proposition. The first people who vote agree with the proposition, okay? Believe that the proposition is absolutely true. Men in the 21st century are suffering from a crisis of masculinity as they attempt to negotiate shifting gender relations. Those of you who agree with that, please applaud now. Okay, that was a long and steady applause. Now, for those of you who disagree that there is a crisis and men are suffering from this 21st century gender subject formation, please applaud now. A smaller number, but with bigger body weight. Okay, so let's start the debate conversation. For Team Pro Crisis, I would like to introduce Taylor, and Taylor, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you. In our society, we often discuss the cumulative pressure of the media on young women and how it affects their development and their well-being. But we often overlook the same pressure on men. Social pressure to assert one's masculinity and what it means to be a real man is intense. One cannot turn around without seeing a commercial, a billboard, or other media that discusses and debates what true or real masculinity means. In our society, men can't avoid measuring themselves against these models and on many occasions are forced to conclude that they are woefully inadequate. A perfect example of the social pressure on men is present in the recent series of Old Spice commercials. In the advertisement, an ideal man, played by actor Isaiah Mustafa, addresses a female audience. He says, and I quote, "Hello ladies, look at your man. Now back at me. Now back at your man. Now back at me. Sadly, he isn't me. But if he stopped using lady scented body wash and switched to Old Spice, he could smell like me. Look down, back up, where are you? You're on a boat. With the man your man could smell like. What's in your hand? Back at me. I have it. It's an oyster with 2 tickets, that thing you love. Look again. Now back at me. The tickets are now diamonds. Anything is possible when your man smells like Old Spice and not a lady. I'm on a horse." This marketing approach is directed towards a female audience. The impact of the commercial's persuasive appeal lies in the definition of what a real man smells like, and by extension, what a real man is. The image of a man as portrayed by Mustafa in this commercial is an embodiment of a female fantasy and is an unattainable goal for real men. Despite its humor, this ad points to a larger crisis of masculinity, a crisis advertisers capitalize upon to generate profits and fuel the business demand cycle. This ad demonstrates the infantilization of men in society and the loss of traditional masculinity in our culture. So what does it mean to have a crisis of masculinity? And if we agree that there is one, what has caused this phenomenon and how is it experienced in our culture? Well, the definition of a crisis, according to the Oxford English Dictionary, is a time of intense difficulty or danger, a time when difficult or important decision must be made, or the turning point of a disease when an important change takes place. With this in mind, we argue that masculinity is experiencing a time of intense difficulty and instability, and furthermore, the traditional models of masculinity are like a disease and at an important moment of change. To develop this argument, we propose 3 fundamental pillars. First, we suggest that there are forces in our 21st century Western culture that have contributed to this contemporary crisis of masculinity. Secondly, we suggest that there are specific moments in history, events that have happened, caused by an intersection of these forces that also have led to crises in masculinity today. And finally, we point out to point to popular culture representations of this crisis in order to suggest that the masculinity crisis is systemic and widespread throughout our society. When we first talk about social forces, we talk about several factors that are relevant here. First of all, the first social shift indicates a decline in marriage, and this becoming less prevalent in our society. By extension, this threatens the male identity as the primary breadwinner and provider for families. The age of marriage is considerably gone up, and more women remain unmarried today, providing for themselves and their families. This has also led to an increase in single mothers and women reproducing by themselves. Today, 40% of children are born to single mothers. Not all women choose to be single mothers, but many now have the option, and the stigma has been removed in a lot of cases. Since 1976, the percentage of women in the early 40s who have not given birth has nearly doubled, and often this is by choice. Women are also more consumed with their education and their careers. This stigma has been removed in our society, and women continue to earn more, learn more, and move forward in society. The implications of this are extraordinary. The age of men's overwhelming economic dominance is past, and a new age of female power is dawning. Men are increasingly being rendered redundant in our society. There are also specific moments in history, as I talked about earlier, that caused by an interaction of the social forces in our culture, and this leads to a crisis in masculinity that we experience today. One instance of this happened a really long time ago, in the Middle Ages, when the first Black Plague hit and wiped out 1/3 to 1/2 of the population across Europe. For the first time, women had the opportunity to own land, to start careers, and to have rights that they didn't have before. We noticed this again more recently in our history, during World War II. This brought about a fundamental shift in our culture, where for the first time, as men left to go to war and join the front lines, women had the opportunity to get jobs, take roles in factories, hospitals, and in storefronts owning their own businesses. When men came back, they weren't really ready to give those up, and it became a real first time that women were able to join the workforce by choice. Women flooded major cities after this, taking on political, social, legal, and corporate roles that began a trend of hardworking, passionate, and proud women. This historical event also set off a trend of gender wars in our society, where socially disadvantaged women learned to fight tooth and nail for the roles that men thought they had earned by birth. This social disorder brought about the trend of women surpassing men in the workplace and has brought us to our current situation. When we also look to pop culture, we also see more evidence of a masculinity crisis. Pop culture has acted on men as a group in our society in a variety of ways, portraying men in movies as impossible examples of unattainable masculinity, paired with real-life male celebrities who rarely work, when a career was formerly the measure of a man. We also see powerful female celebrities dating younger men and bankrolling their debutante-esque lifestyles. These situations, paired with the commercial I mentioned earlier, we start to notice a palpable anxiety around masculinity in the 21st century. Men are suffering from a crisis, and a crisis that doesn't appear to be going anywhere if women have anything to say about it.
Masculinity is not in crisis in the 21st century. Given the time constraints of this debate, I will focus on the concepts of masculinity in crisis in an attempt to show that misunderstandings undergird the arguments of those who disagree. I will then provide a plausible explanation for why this is the case. The concept of masculinity may fruitfully be described as a cluster concept. It is a subset of interrelated physical, mental, and behavioral characteristics one may sensibly attribute to men. This subset is essentially defined in opposition to femininity. Such characteristics cannot be both masculine and feminine. In other words, the concept is based on difference. It goes without saying men and women share many more characteristics than they do not. It should also go without saying that these differences are typical or general and not absolute. Men can have feminine physical, mental, and behavioral characteristics, and women can have masculine physical, mental, and behavioral characteristics, with the exclusion, of course, of the male and female sex organs. Let me throw out a possible list of masculine and feminine mental or behavioral characteristics taken from a study used to survey children on their perceptions of masculinity and femininity by Dr. Susan D. Witt. I edited it a bit to correct for some redundancies. Feminine traits: yielding, shy, flatterable, sympathetic, soothes hurts, warm, gullible, gentle, doesn't use harsh language, understanding, cheerful, affectionate, loyal, sensitive, soft-spoken, tender, childlike, loves children, and compassionate. Masculine traits: independent, self-reliant, assertive, forceful, athletic, defends beliefs, strong personality, analytical, leadership, decisive, dominant, aggressive, individualistic, ambitious, takes risks, takes a stand, competitive. Some of these characteristics are a tad silly, perhaps based on illusion and culturally inculcated expectations. But some are more important, near the hard core of the cluster of concepts attached to masculinity. For instance, assertive, decisive, and aggressive. It is vitally important to note that the concept of masculinity can be used both prescriptively, typically a man should or should be expected to be such and such, and descriptively, men are typically such and such. In the descriptive case, the method of verification is easy. One simply looks at the facts. In the prescriptive case, things are more complicated. For not just facts are taken into account, they are very important, but also hopes, desires, purposes, etc. Each characteristic may also be evaluated on its own merits. There are pros and cons to all of them. It is extremely important not to conflate the two uses. Because men happen to be different than women in certain ways does not necessarily mean that they should be. It is simply not the case that men have to strive to be as masculine as possible in all aspects, because as men, well, they just should be masculine. This is a form of prescriptive dogmatism. In an individualistic and cosmopolitan society, one many of us are striving to create, the decisions and desires of the individual, within reason, override considerations of masculinity and femininity, and thus all kinds of mixtures of the two kinds of characteristics are possible and desirable, and may, ideally, stand side by side with the traditional organization of roles in relative harmony. Furthermore, there is scientific evidence to suggest that core masculine characteristics are, in fact, based in natural biological differences between the sexes. Thus, it is questionable to state, as some do, that men are a certain way and shouldn't be, if it is natural for them to be this way. It is better to ask, what should we do about it? The concept of crisis can be used in a few different ways. It could be a decisive turning point that may result in recovery or collapse. It could be an internal crisis or contradiction in the thing in question. Finally, used at its weakest, it could mean a sort of general widespread concern about something. I challenge my opposition to show masculinity is in crisis under any of these definitions. That the conception of masculinity changes around the edges of the cluster over time is an obvious truth. Styles of dress change, the division of traditional roles can change as society changes. But the hard core of masculinity has not changed, for it is rooted in natural biological differences. It is changes to this hard core that would constitute a true crisis of masculinity. This has not happened. Why then is this even an issue? Fundamentally, academics tend to be hyperbolic in their assertions to make what they're working on seem more important than it is.
Are you being masculine and just ignoring me?
Am I supposed to stop?
No, you can continue, but you just need to know you're a little over your 5 minutes.
Okay, I'll be a little bit more time. Is that okay?
Since I'm gentle and understanding, I'll give you a couple.
Fundamentally, academics tend to be hyperbolic in their assertions to make what they're working on seem more important than it is. Every danger is a potential crisis. In this case, we are dealing primarily with the reaction to a certain type of feminism, what Christina Hoff-Sommers, author of The War Against Boys, calls gender feminism. Gender feminism is distinguished from equity feminism. Equity feminism is based on all kinds of good arguments for why women should be politically and legally equal to men and have the same opportunities. Gender feminism, on the other hand, and I quote, "Most contemporary feminism and almost the entirety of academic and political feminism, as Farrell discovered it now, is what Sommers has called gender feminism, which is essentially based on a form of Marxist theory that substitutes gender for Marx's category of class and simply adds the two together, usually with race thrown in. This sort of race, class, and gender theory is typically a dangerous form of political moralism with the same totalitarian characteristics as other versions of Marxism have proven to display. One consequence of this is that the substantive content of criticism is rarely addressed, but that is considered sufficient to vilify critics as, in effect, class enemies, i.e. directing ad hominem arguments against them at their status in terms of race, class, or gender, or simply in terms of their critical attitudes, is sufficient to refute their arguments. Hence the convenient device of dismissing most of Western civilization as the product of dead white males, though for feminism the inconvenient fact remains that Eastern and Middle Eastern civilization and every other must also be dismissed as the products of dead non-white males. Gender feminism may be waging a war against masculinity from the safety of their ivory towers, and there's reason to believe, according to Summers, they are making inroads on stunting the education of young boys. I don't believe she shows us more than a potential danger, and I don't think what's happening now will continue in any serious way. In any event, a robust masculinity thrives on being challenged. Real men everywhere should be disappointed. Thank you.
Thank you. We already have an obvious difference between masculinity and femininity, and that is 2 minutes and 43 seconds. Okay, so Taylor and Bill, you have the opportunity to talk to one another, clarify points, ask each other questions.
Look around you. Are you overcome by an overwhelming wave of manliness, flooding your every perceptive sense? Or are you surrounded by women who have taken the seats at the big kids' table? Surrounded by overachieving women, the know-it-alls, the keeners, the tryhards, the achievers. Are the men around you content to sit back and let others call the shots, make the decisions, and let the chips fall where they may? Men have taken a backseat in our society. They've been pushed down by women who have been driven to the brink of madness to excel, who have informed the men that there's no room left for the B-types, the passive ones, the ones who aren't willing to fight for their place at the table. Men have been pushed by social, historical, and pop culture pressures to sit down and shut up in the presence of crazy women. Technology and specialization have worked their ways in our society. Our society doesn't need the average man to hunt, fish, fight, and fix anymore. But instead of fighting to assert their masculinity in other ways, they've given way to women who have been conditioned to fight for their place. Women in our society have learned that if they walk into a room with a man who's equally qualified, they won't come out on top. They've learned to overqualify themselves and to fight for their place at the table, which has put masculinity truly in crisis in our society. Thanks.
So it seems you're implying that if women succeed, then that takes a shot at masculinity somehow. I'm just not exactly sure why that's the case.
I think in our society there's only so much room for success. When you surround yourself with women who are constantly proving themselves in every arena, you give men the opportunity to sit back and take a passive role, which isn't typically a traditionally associated with masculinity. Masculinity typically we would associate with sort of overbearing, successful, achieving. I think we can agree on that. So I think when you allow women throughout history and through our society to take those roles, it takes away the masculinity in men in the same sphere.
I'm just not sure if success is limited like that. Like women are taking men's places. I also think that there's a lot of different masculine roles. Not everybody can be a leader.
Right, but if we consider success as the only measure, then you consider a woman who stays home with children to be successful. But that's not necessarily masculine.
Wait, just repeat that. I don't think.
You said success isn't just in one sense. So if we're identifying success with masculinity and you're linking success in many different areas, well, a woman who stays home with children you could consider a success, but that's not typically masculine.
No, sorry, but it is. Well, wait, I never said I never said success was typically masculine. I said aggression, ambition, and some other stuff were.
So you would associate aggression and ambition not with success, but shyness and soft-spokenness with success?
No.
Well, I mean, if we're going to be dichotomous about the two characteristics, right? If we're going to put them on one side or the other, you have to typically associate one with success and one not with success.
Well, I think that's the reason why that is a reason why men are generally more successful than women, which I think my colleague will show in her little speech. But I did also, the point I tried to make in my speech is it's not necessary for men in this day and age to be masculine. You don't have to be masculine if you don't want to be.
Okay. Thank you very much, Taylor and Bill. That concludes round 1. Are you guys ready for round 2?